This is not the video I wanted to make on Dark Deity, but here we are. Hello everyone, this is Mithril Zenith, and I wanted to make a full review of Dark Deity because I've been having fun playing it, I've been frustrated playing it, I've learned a lot of things, both good and bad, from playing it. Things that I've brought up in some of my design videos, things that I have wanted to bring up in the future. I got to chapter 19 and I encountered a hard crash bug. Now, I could probably LTC the chapter in 2 turns and keep playing, but I don't really want to take the risk that future chapters might not be bugged in similar ways. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, here is a clip.
Literally unplayable. This code error has happened to me twice now, and a third crash has happened. This chapter cannot be beaten. It crashes in the same time every time. I don't think I can finish this game. I don't think this game is finishable in this state. Please fix it.
Yeah, and that's also not the only bug that I've run into. I've run into a number of movement bugs, unit at X position but listed as Y position, a bug where the enemy attacked my unit from 21 tiles away, a crash bug wherein if I tried to examine a particular monster I would get crashed. So many bugs, so many glitches. This game apparently is in a less stable state than when it launched, even though it is in a more balanced state than when it launched. So whatever changes they made in the meantime between launching and when I played it, yeah, not great. Dark Deity devs, if you're looking at this, please patch your game. A lot of people will want to play the first one before or after playing the second one. Please, this is important for you to do. Anyway, so the video I wanted to make about Dark Deity is just talking about how I think this game is so much more fun than it deserves to be. That sounds bad. That sounds really bad. I know. Because this game has so many problems, so many issues, so many things that I don't really fundamentally agree with, or are interesting concepts but not really applied super well. But also it capitalizes on the fun of moving units around, of leveling up, of finding tight matchups between your units versus enemy units, and really rewarding clever thinking in doing that, and really rewarding investing into your units in simple ways and not in complex ways like modern Fire Emblem does. So it really captures the essence of what makes stuff like GBA Fire Emblem fun and interesting to me, without massively changing the game like what modern Fire Emblem does to me. I really do appreciate the fact that death is not permadeath but is still punished. I think the Grievous Wound system is actually really well implemented because the losses are not so severe as to make a unit not worth using at all. It's one stat losing, I think, 10% of its current points, so usually between 1 and 3 points, based on the type of damage that reduced the unit to 0 HP. So oftentimes, based on matchups, you're going to be losing, say, defense on your mage, or losing skill on your fighter, or something like that. You're not necessarily going to be losing the most important stats on your units based on who kills them and how they die, based on type matchups. I like the way that there is punishment because it encourages you to have perfect runs and encourages you to try to keep the units alive, but I also like that it's not so punishing so as to basically necessitate restarting whenever a unit dies. You're not losing content, for instance. That's the biggest complaint people have against permadeath and Fire Emblem, is that when a unit dies, you are losing content in terms of supports, in terms of other units they could recruit, in terms of all the other things. You're not just losing that unit. And the Dark Deity system does a really good job of solving that. Those are the 2 big points that I like about Dark Deity that either other games don't do, or that are just like kind of feel improved on based on other games. The points that I don't like, let's talk about, so because I've tried to record this multiple times, I've rambled way too much, so I'm going to try to keep it concise. The class design structure system removes a lot of unit individuality, and removes a lot of the feeling of who a unit is supposed to be, and instead rewards where you put the unit. For those of you not in the know, in Dark Deity, whenever a unit reaches level 10, they are forced to choose between a promotion branch of 4, You are locked into that choice. There is no reclassing anywhere in the game. You are stuck with that, and that class gives you 2 extra skills. And then when you hit level 30, you choose another promotion branch of 4 again. It's the same 4 no matter what class you chose at branch 2. These again give you 2 different skills, but you keep the 2 skills that you learned from your previous class. And every class change changes your growth rates, but unless you are a unit who is joining at a class change moment, they do not affect your base stats. So for instance, if you are a unit that joins after being level 10, the player is required to put you in a class, and each of these classes have various, widely varying base stats and growths, and the player is basically asked to intuit what class would be good for what unit or the situation or what have you, instead of being able to experiment or discover things, or even get a sense of what the unit looks and feels like before using them. You just have maybe a little bit of dialogue in the story, maybe. You have what the unit looks like, and then you're asked, hey, pick a class out of these things. I think it's a very interesting way that they do it, because they use a base class system where there are 6 base classes, each one with an out-of-combat ability. You have, I'm just going to list off the abilities: heal, push, phase, disarm, chain, and haste. You have those 6 abilities, and each of those abilities are tied to a particular base class, but then each of those base classes can become 4 different Tier 2 and then Tier 3 classes, which wildly change what you can do, but still having those 6 abilities represented. So for instance, your fighter class, who has the push ability, can be classed into a swordsman, a berserker, a mounted lancer, and an armored swordsman. Those 4 basic branches, and then they have some crazy transformations in Tier 3. You have the Adept class, which is the Foot Lancer, which can be turned into a different Lancer, a Fire Monk, a Lightning Monk, and a hammer-wielding Life Drainer. And they have the Chain base ability, which prevents enemies from moving. You have the Healer base class, which heals, who can be turned into a tanky hammer wielder, a tanky mounted hammer wielder, a light mage, or a dark mage. And the dark mage has lifesteal, so classic nod to Nosferatu and Fire Emblem. You have the Archer class, which gets haste, which can be turned into a foot archer with higher crit, a mounted archer with specialty against mages, a 2-wielding swordsperson with extra speed and bonus effects on doubling, and an axe user with a crit focus who also gets more powerful if he's alone with other enemies. You have the Rogue base class, which has the Disarm skill, which can be turned into a thief with extra disarm range, an assassin, which automatically hits low HP enemies, a mounted axe-wielding brigand, and a duelist fencer who is much stronger if they are solo, meaning no allies next to them. And then you have the wizard, which has phase, which is basically repositioned from Fire Emblem Heroes, who can be transformed into a fire wizard with lifesteal, basically an arcane wizard with a lot higher magic, an arcane wizard with higher speed and increased phase range, and a battle mage who uses lightning, who's heavily armored. So these are all of the basic Tier 2 classes, and like I said, Tier 3 gets wild. You have Dragon Riders, you have Flying Elementals, you have stuff like that. But did you notice something? The base classes, for many of them, particularly for the Adept, don't really feel like they naturally lead into the Tier 2 or Tier 3 classes, or maybe they lead into one but not another. And I think this is part of the issue that a lot of people have, where, hey, I just got this new rogue character. Are they a horse-riding barbarian, a fencer duelist, or an assassin or a thief? You know, you have some options that feel like they flow a lot more naturally than others, shall I say. And the characters' PNG art does not change with what class you put them into. So for instance, almost all of the archer base class units have bows or quivers with arrows and whatnot in their art, and so if you make them a sword wielder or an axe wielder, they still have quivers of arrows on them, and it feels a little odd. It's like, hey, am I betraying their bow wielding nature? Not mechanical, but again, it's all about that feel, and sometimes that feel can feel a little bit off. But if you thought it was fully not mechanical, we'll wait until I get into the weapon system and the damage and armor system, which I think is an inelegant solution to a problem created by having a lot of units with a lot of stats, but trying desperately to find a way to have a particular type matchup system that's not limited to like a weapon triangle. If you have a system where every unit only has one weapon type, how can you really have just a triangle? It feels very flat. They wanted to have something a bit more dynamic, and I appreciate that. However, they have done so by putting in multipliers on all units, so basically you have 50 percentage points that are divvied among two different armor types that a unit is good against, a unit's particular damage type is good against. And you have 15 percentage points that are negative modifiers that are applied to the other two armor types that a unit is, quote, bad against. And so, for instance, you might have Arcane Magic, which deals 40% bonus damage to things in plate armor, or maybe it's 35, some high percentage bonus damage, but then has a penalty against Rune Cloak, against other mages, basically. This is interesting. This creates some dynamics where, hey, you might have one particular damage type, but there are multiple units that have that damage type. Maybe you want to find one with a different armor type class that has an even better matchup. Like maybe using my piercing damage type with chain armor is not so great. I want to find a piercing damage type with leather armor, or a piercing damage type with plate armor, and then maybe that will be the ideal solution type thing. And so you can come up with some unideal but beneficial situations, or some very ideal optimal solutions, and then you can also still fight through suboptimal situations. You will just be taking more damage or dealing some less damage. I think it's interesting, and I think gameplay-wise it works, but I think that it creates some problems on the player side because percentages are hard to calculate, especially when they're not even. Like 50%, 25%, most people use halves and quarters a lot. And so those are fairly easy to mentally calculate. When we start getting into stuff like 35%, unless you have a big round number, 35% of a number is really hard to quantify, especially when you're then asking, well, is this before or after my weapon is calculated? Is this before or after their defense is calculated? Is this rounded up? Is this rounded down? I can't give you the answers to that because the game doesn't give the answers to me. I would have to experiment and really push through things and really figure out, or go into the code and figure that out by reading the code. And as a player who just wants to play the game and enjoy themselves, I don't think that's really working. And so while I think these numbers work to create a situation of good and bad matchups, I don't like their implementation. I find it inelegant, purely in the sense of it's not something that I can really contain in my head easily as a player who's used to doing small number computation in Fire Emblem. I can do some multiplication, I can do some division, but when you're asking me to cut weird percentages off, that's a lot harder to do. And there's one more thing I want to talk about before going back into class design, and that is the weapon design system, the weapon upgrade system. So basically, every unit has 4 different weapons: a strong weapon, an accurate weapon, a crit focus weapon, and a quote-unquote balanced weapon, which just has a different stat spread. Usually it's a little lighter or a little more accurate, but it's not as powerful or as accurate or as crit focused as any of the other 3. So depending on what weapon type primarily a unit uses, you have lances, axes, hammers, swords, daggers, fire magic, lightning magic, arcane magic, light and dark magic. I think those are all of them. Depending on what weapon a unit uses, you'll be given these 4 weapons. And so there's no real inventory management, there's no real changes to, oh hey, if I give this unit a javelin, they can attack at 1-2 range versus only being locked to 1 range. No, a unit's range is determined by their base class, unless a glitch happens and the unit attacks from 21 tiles away. And then from that base class and range, a unit then has these options just to affect their damage, accuracy, crit rate, and weapon weight. So, seems pretty elegant, and then you, instead of getting new weapons, you gain upgrade tokens, which can upgrade your existing weapons on a particular unit. So for instance, I give you a tier 1 upgrade token, so you can upgrade one of your weapons of your choice to the next rank above. And then once you have 2 ranks, you transform, and then you need a tier 2 weapon token to upgrade, and then a tier 3, and then you finally cap out with 1 tier 4 upgrade token, and you have the full set. Interesting, pretty simple. You get a little bit of that sense of discovery of, ooh, what's my weapon going to turn into? Problems come in because you don't know what the stats of your final upgrade are when you start investing these resources. This is the primary gold resource in the game, so you are basically being asked to spend a lot of gold, which is everything comes back to gold in this, and I'll talk about how everything comes back to gold in the future. Everything comes back to gold in this game, and so you are spending all your gold to level up these weapons that you don't even know what they'll turn into. And then the fact that almost every weapon increases in weight as you level it up, that without any guaranteed weightless option, is very frustrating, very problematic, and I think definitely hampers certain classes. Like, for instance, axe classes. All axes weigh way too much and only get heavier the more you upgrade them. So you actually end up being incentivized to leave certain weapons weak just so they don't impact your attack speed as much. But then the damage doesn't scale up, or the accuracy doesn't scale up, and so the weapon ends up being so weak to as basically be pointless, even though maybe it's a defensive option at most to say, hey, I don't want to get doubled as much. And so you're investing all these points into these weapons, not really knowing what they're going to turn into unless you look it up on a wiki ahead of time. And it provides a very fun, ooh, discovery, I wonder what this is going to turn into. But then becomes very frustrating when you change classes and then the weapon type changes that you've invested all your points into and you don't get those points back. Like, for instance, maybe I really wanted to keep leveling up this crit-based dagger. And, oh, the crit-based dagger is really good. It has 0 base weight. It has like 27 or 30 crit or something by the end of it. It's not the best damage, but it's still decent, and it has some accuracy on it. And then you level it up and it transforms into an axe, a crit-based axe with a ton of weight. And maybe a little higher damage and pretty good crit, but a ton of weight. I didn't want the high weight. I specifically chose the crit-based dagger because it would level up without adding weight onto my unit. Now my unit feels like they're doubly screwed, and I don't get those points back to invest in something else. So this is how the class change system, and not having really an option to keep your class very similar all the time at least. Sometimes it locks you into a particular class line, and sometimes you don't even have that choice. Like, for instance, the Adept. The Adept is a plate-armored, lance-using, piercing damage unit. The Adept does not have a plate armor, lance-using, piercing option to promote into. They can promote into a crush weapon plate armor unit. They can promote into a piercing leather armor unit, or they can change into a fire rune cloak or lightning chain armor unit. But they can't change into a piercing lance-using plate armor unit, and so you are forced to give up at least one of your options, and sometimes if you've invested into their weapons, you are forced to then have a lot of levels into a different weapon that you may or may not actually like in that particular class. Say, for instance, I really like the balanced version of the lance. Well, I might not really like the balanced version of fire or thunder, but I'm stuck with it now. So maybe I need to spend some points to upgrade a different version of the weapon that I actually like better. I don't know. That's part of the problem of this class design and weapon design system, where it feels like I see what they're doing with both sides of it, but it feels like the implementation brings those two things against each other and really clashes. Last thing I did want to mention is I talked about how everything comes back to gold. Everything comes back to gold. You can argue that a lot of Fire Emblem games have the same issue where everything comes back to gold at the end, but Fire Emblem games give you things like weapons you can't buy. Fire Emblem gives you things like stat boosters or promotion items you can't buy, or if you can only buy very limited numbers of them. In Dark Deity, you can buy infinite numbers of every stat booster, you can buy infinite numbers of every weapon upgrade, and every food item that you've gotten to a point to unlock. Like, those do slowly unlock, and maybe there are some food items you can't buy, but you can buy everything with gold, and you can sell everything back for gold. So basically you are incentivized to just use your gold however you see fit, and not have to worry about, oh, well, this resource is for a unit type that I'm not using. Like, hey, you get a great S-rank sword. Well, I don't have any sword users with S-rank to use it. I appreciate that you're avoiding that problem and by instead being like, hey, here's a tier 4 weapon upgrade tool. And even if you don't need them, you're already at max tier 4, you can sell it for gold and then buy a stat booster or something. I appreciate that. That is very ease of use, very user-friendly. What I don't necessarily appreciate is the fact that then it feels like nothing else matters, and it feels like I'm incentivized to just sell everything I have just to get more weapon upgrade tokens for the units that eventually rotate out because I got stronger units later in the game. I feel like there's some possibility here, but I feel like the gold-only system does have its own flaws and caveats. I think it's fine, I think it works, but it is something that I think needs a little bit of a measured hand for, and we need to point out both the benefits and flaws of it, and yeah, I think it's interesting though. It's also a gold-only system because even experience can sometimes tie back into gold, because you get experience for using your non-combat abilities, which means you could, in theory, stay on a map for forever and just shove each other around and gain experience. There is decay, you will eventually gain less experience, and your experience is based not only on how many times you've used it on a map, but also on like what level your target is that you're using it on. I think at some point in time your experience you'll stop gaining experience or stop getting meaningful experience from doing these things. It's kind of like how some people will just sit and level their Dancer in Fire Emblem infinitely on a chapter because if there's no pressure to go through. Dark Deity tries to avoid this by saying, hey, we will give you gold if you clear chapters quickly, and you'll get less gold the longer you take. But what this incentivizes a lot of players to do, if they're trying to optimize, is pick a chapter where they aren't going to be getting a lot of gold anyway, and just use that chapter to grind out, and then beat chapters faster to get the gold to get the upgrade materials. And so kind of pick and choose what chapters you want gold from versus which ones you want experience from. I think that this system is interesting, and I think it can work, and I think incentivizing players in some way to play quickly is beneficial, because it gives you some time to say, hey, the strategy that might be most effective might be perfectly safe, but might not be the most fun or enjoyable. I want to push my players to play this game in a way that I feel might be more fun and enjoyable for them, so I'm going to incentivize them going faster or doing particular things. I like that. That's what like Path of Radiance does with its bonus objectives. I think bonus objectives are very good. I think that only using gold for it is a little bit reductive, but I also think that with a system wherein everything is gold, using gold for it is still beneficial. It's just interesting to me to kind of see that interplay between experience then and gold, which then makes it feel like even experience is gold to a degree. But anyway, that's kind of all that I had to say on the matter. Points aside, I really enjoyed Dark Deity and I wanted to finish it, but I'm running into hard crash bugs, and hard crash bugs make a game unplayable. So whatever you did to change the game and break it in the past, please have one person take a look at the code and fix these hard crash bugs so we can finish the game, because if you're coming out with a sequel, a lot of people are going to want to play the original, and a lot of people are going to get very frustrated and doubtful in the sequel if the original has hard crash bugs in it. Anyway, all this aside, I think Dark Deity is actually pretty fun. I think there's a lot to learn from it in a game design perspective, from both good and bad, because if you're playing something that's very well put together and very well made, you can't necessarily learn a lot from it, especially if it doesn't really have a full soul there. Dark Deity is 110% soul. You have so much passion in creating it, but there are so many things that are kind of like put together, held together a little bit with duct tape and a prayer, and the crash bugs definitely show that. So you can play an endless game of good idea, bad idea with Dark Deity. I think it's really fun and really interesting, but what are your thoughts? If you played it, did you play it pre-patch? Did you play it post-patch? Have you played with the rebalanced things? Let me know in the comments down below. Till then, thank you so much to Royal the Goose Guard Sal Mellon for joining the channel at Royal the Goose Guard tier. Thank you very much. And for the Goose Guard members, C2 Peekly, Enigmatic Mr. L, The Big Hermit 007, Bro Duderman, NKO Rico, Kumi Miss Mesmerism, The Cag, and Relaz6 for joining the channel at Lagoose Guard tier. If you want to join as well, you can do so. You get access to videos early, and then there are some members-only stuff, mostly just like some Q&A videos and uninterrupted gameplay and stuff like that. Things that I couldn't otherwise put on the channel without really destroying my algorithm. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. Till next time, this is Mithril Zenith signing out.